Ms. Boutiette on the report, but I see Ms. Anderson on our screen. Ms. Anderson, over to you, please.
That's correct. Ms. Boutiette is on holidays today and has asked me to present this report on her behalf. I don't know that I need to cover anything in particular. The recommendations or the highlights are pretty basic. There's two grant policy that we're combining into one. It was the wish of council to have this policy reconsidered, redrafted. So here it is for your consideration.
All right. Council, let's start with Councilor Graziano, please.
Thank you, through your worship. Ms. Anderson, forgive me, but are we familiar with who is eligible for these grants, or who are rather eligible for these grants?
Currently or in the new policy, sorry.
In the new policy, thank you.
Yes, I'm going to go to the policy itself as I don't want to misspeak, but. So it could be a not-for-profit organization, a charity, community groups and associations like the Lakes and Cottages Associations, and unincorporated groups for not-for-profit goals and governance structures. And that's on page, if you're in the document itself, the agenda document, or on the report itself, it's page 2.
Page 2, correct, on the policy document.
Right.
Section D. D1 is eligibility.
Thank you. I'm just making note of that. If I can, I see that there's an August 31st deadline. Would that apply for this year as well? Or is that commencing next year?
Really, that'd be commencing next year.
It'll be commencing next year. Thank you for your clarification.
Any other questions or comments? Councillor Bocek, please, followed by Councillors Predko and Jarvis.
Thank you. And this is just a bit of a technical question. In the application for funding and granting, is it able to be done electronically online, or does it have to be manually filled out?
No, it is done electronically, preferably. It was done that way in the last few years, and we hope to continue it. But we do offer, if they can't complete it online, that they can pick it up in the office.
Thank you.
Councillor Predko, please.
Thank you, and through you, your worship. My only concern is the type of grants that we're putting through the policy, and I think they're all meritorious, but we have events and recreation and capital projects and environmental protection and rehabilitation grants. I think, for me, in our experience in looking at grants that were being proposed last year, having one pool of money for all of these different, quite different types of grants may be difficult to kind of trade one thing off another. We'll be comparing docks to Santa Claus parades to fish habitat rehabilitation. I don't know if we want to allocate certain dollars in our budget discussion for the different categories, but I think having one pool may be disadvantageous for different types of applications, just based on council's preference for one type of activity over another.
Thank you, Councillor Jarvis.
Yeah, just further to the question posed by Councillor yeah, I hardly know the guy.
Same person.
Under general terms and procedures, I hope this clarifies that the implementation of the municipal grants program is at the discretion of the council. So I presume we'd be administering it at this level, and at that time, I mean, any larger amounts, this is only for small amounts. SSEA is a separate entity entirely when it comes to us granting them money. They wouldn't be part of this.
That's up to $5,000.
Yeah, $5,000 is a lot, I know. And, but I know of our cottage association. I know, for instance, that our community church needs money for dock rehabilitation. So that's something that I think comes under what you're talking about. But I think that's up to council to decide. So, and that's what that'll be our discretion at that time. My question goes back to implementation. Celine, if somebody wants to apply for monies for next year, they need to apply by when? Right now? At this, they got to get an application in this year for next year, correct?
That was the previous way. So
Yeah.
in this new grant process, you'll have till from January 1st to March 31st of the year that you want the grant. So in your budget process, we will recommend an amount for these grants, but it won't be specific on who's applied, unlike in the past. In the past, we used to wait on these groups to submit their application and we would approve or deny them during the budget process.
Right.
Julie has moved this around a little bit.
So, and so we'll set the money aside and then we'll get the applications in by the end of January of 2024, correct?
End of March 2024, and we'll notify successful and unsuccessful candidates by April 30th of
Okay,
that year of 2024.
I think I missed the dates on there. Okay, thank you.
I would like to make a couple of comments before Councilor Wojcik leads off round two. I'm a little bit concerned that this policy is a little too, I'll call it open, or free, or whatever you want to call it. And the reason I say that is you say up to $5,000, and yet we had quite a few groups in the past that were getting $1,000, $500. And while I understand delegating this authority to the senior management team, I think that makes perfect sense, because I didn't think council should have not been wasting a lot of time, in my opinion, voting on $1,000 grants to various cottage associations. We nonetheless, in this policy, haven't given guidelines. I mean, I recall in the past that if anybody was running a summer camp type program, we would grant them up to $1,000. And that was based on the fact that the township decades ago used to run some recreational programs that they then canceled. We also had a general guideline that if somebody's running a one-day event, a regatta or what have you, it was up to $500. And then we also had some guideline, and I forgot what it was, that there was a limit, and the limit was something like $1,500 per association or something like that. Again, I don't remember the exact details. What concerns me with this policy, unless I totally missed something somewhere, is somebody could come along and ask for money up to $5,000 for any purpose they thought was valid. And if a member of the senior management team said, yeah, that sounds good, here you go. And then somebody else comes along with something that perhaps council would have supported, but you've already run out of money. And so I feel that this is incomplete in that I'd love to see us define things a little bit more. I mean, to me, a capital project is a very different kettle of fish, dare I call it, than an event or an activity. And so that's where I'm a little concerned with the policy. With that, Councilor Wojcik, let's start round two.
Thank you. My thought was pretty much in line with your way of thinking. And I remember back when I first got on council and we were doing things like the Just Add Water Festival and a lot of community events, there was a different procedure in place. And I don't know whatever happened to it, but I experienced it firsthand. And that was that any grants for $1,000 and up had to come to council for approval. Anything $1,000 down was called, I could be wrong, but you guys are mostly accountants, it was called in kind. And in kind meant that when I asked for $1,000 to do something, I had to bring receipts and prove to them. And when I submitted my receipts, I got paid. And that's what they called in kind. So there was a process at one time where, like I said, $1,000 down, staff had the right to distribute the money in kind. And then $1,000 and up, council had the approval authority, and it wasn't in kind. It was just, we heard everything and we approved it. So just to expand on what you had said, Mayor Coates here, that I think this is a little bit incomplete, and I think we need to have some parameters around gifting this money to different organizations. Thank you for bringing it up.
Thank you. Councillor Graziano.
Yeah, and I would concur with what was said by Councillor Bocek as well as yourself, Mayor. I'd be happy to delegate authority to SMT at a certain level and below, after which, if anything above that level is required or is requested, perhaps it should come before council for us to make a decision. There are going to be circumstances in which some capital requests are going to be made for community partners such as the docks, as was articulated earlier, as an example that may exceed that, and we know that they are the community could very well use it, and I'd like to see that we retain that decision-making authority. Thank you.
Yeah, and just for clarification from my end, I wasn't trying to take, in one sense, authority away from senior management team as much as I wanted to make sure that we all understood the guidelines. What generally, and for instance, I think we should have a conversation of to what degree do we want to, excuse me again, support capital projects for, I'll call it private docks versus camps, where we, one of the criteria we used to have, at least with the camps and the events, is that anybody could attend. They may have been designed for particular associations membership, but anybody could attend that regatta or attend that camp that was open to the public. And so I think we need a little bit further discussion, including on the capital component of this. And I see that CAO Mariotti has stuck his hand up, so I'm going to go to him for now.
Thank you, Mayor Coetzee. Yeah, so we we put that arbitrary number of $5,000 in following the last budget cycle, where council felt that there were too many delegations asking for for small amounts of money. So I think before that it was 1,000. We bumped it up to 5. So we're open to council to tell us kind of what that cutoff number is, and we can put it in the policy. And also if there's a bit more clarification in terms of where you would like these monies spent, we can certainly update the wording in the bylaw. It's been brought forward now here for discussion at COWS, so that hopefully next month we can bring something that council can approve, because then this policy will tie into the next budget cycle as well. So it'd be good also to have a discussion in terms of how much funding council would like to have, and maybe to Councillor Predko's point, maybe there could be different pots of funding for different types of activities. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Looks like I was talking to myself. Sorry about that. I suggested go to Miss Anderson, and then we'll follow that with Councillors Jarvis and Predko.
So those are all good points, Mayor and Council. Some of them are covered currently under the policy, and just wanted to bring your attention to that under section 1B, I'm not very good with Roman numerals, 4 and 5, some of it says funded programs must be offered and available to all residents within the township. And it talks specifically about capital projects as well. But I did write down a lot of the comments, and I will put them in an email to Julie for her and SMT to discuss again at their next convenience.
All right, thank you. Councillor Jarvis.
Yeah, and then under application review and approval, it says under C, council is the final authority for approval of municipal grant applications. So I'm not sure we're missing anything within this policy as it's been presented to us. I know I missed a couple of points on there on dates, and maybe a few people have missed a few other things, but I think most of the stuff is covered there. I'm thinking of my cottage association, particularly with its rec program and regatta. And I mean, they would qualify, but obviously the final word would come from council on whether they get their grant money. But I will also comment that in the past, I know we've all questioned whether $50 to the Legion in McTier for something is worth council's time to deliberate. On the other hand, so this seems to make sense to me the way it is, the way it's set up.
May I answer that one quickly, Mr. Mayor?
You can answer with whatever time you need.
We do, I think the way that SMT will take the process is they'll receive all application and will prepare maybe a summary for council's approval versus reviewing every application and the details. If council needs more information, we would have it available for them, but it would save all the delegations and the multiple application reviews by council. But yes, there's definitely still some oversight by council.
And I appreciate all that, but I also think it's important that council in one form or another give SMT guidelines.
Yes, yeah.
Because I would hate to see you come forward with us with 12 applications and say you're recommending these 12 payments be made out, and we all of a sudden pick on 2 of them and tear them apart because we had no idea we were funding the X and the Y that they wanted. Whatever that X and Y may be. And that's why I think what would behoove us is to, and not necessarily today, but to come up with general guidelines, so that if for some, I mean, it's almost like having zoning bylaw. We'll have general guidelines, and then if you want a variance from that, you have to apply for it. Well, I mean, I don't want to make it too cumbersome, but you know what I mean. Because the other thing I'm concerned about, quite frankly, is sometimes you'll get an association or two that have quite aggressive fundraisers, and other associations are quietly minding their own business, and yet they may be wanting the same monies for the same things. And I don't want the quieter ones to necessarily lose out.
I understand.
All right. Who else wants to make some comments on all this? Okay, Councillor Predko.
Thank you, and through you, your worship. So just piggybacking on all of that, I do agree some extra guidelines would be extremely helpful. I think if we were to, in the budget process, come up with a grant allotment of money, but I think it would be helpful to have events and programming with a certain cap that is able to be a part of this program. And especially the capital projects, because we could have a couple of capital projects that might be replacement of a sidewalk or a roof that takes up a good portion of our budget for this on 1 or 2 capital projects. So I want to make sure that the money, as we go through, we have an opportunity to make sure it's distributed fairly. And I'm assuming through the process, it would be on a first come, first served basis of approval from SMT. And as well, I'm assuming we would still have an opportunity for organizations to come forward to council and make delegations through the year for special consideration or for the next fiscal year, such as the Honeybee Festival or other events like the Rock the Dock, where we were looking for consideration for insurance. So I don't know if we need to include that provision in the policy. But that kind of clarity might be helpful. And I do like the evaluation form at the end of this process, but there's no loop back to council for the accountability to the program. And it would be nice if there was an annual staff report on the effectiveness or the utilization of the grant money, so that we know that it is actually going to organizations and helping the community.
Thank you. Ms. Anderson, when you're finished writing.
Taking notes. Thank you,
Good.
Mr. Mayor. So there is a, I'll just reopen the policy here. I've lost my train of thought. My goodness. I'm sorry, I'm going to pass on to the next person. I've lost my train of thought.
Well, then let's hear from Mr. Sokash and then Councillor Graziano.
Thank you, Your Worship. Further to what Councillor Predko was suggesting, that's similar to the program we used to have, where there would be a pool of money that applicants could apply for. The maximum was $1,500, but I believe there was only $4,000 or $5,000 in the overall pool. So if the amount that people were applying for was more than what was in the pool of money, then they would get a prorated share of that money. And then the limits, I believe, were $1,500 for events and $1,000 for programs. If council is looking for something similar to that, to those limits, please let us know. We were asked to, a couple of years ago, add capital to the funds, but it was never applied for. I think most of the capital applications came directly to council. So I think before Julie goes back and rewrites this or recrafts it, I think we'd like some clarity on, do you want a program similar to what we used to have, just with a wider breadth of potential applicants, or is it something much different? Thank you.
Councillor Graziano.
Thank you, Your Worship. On the capital discussion, because I do believe we should absolutely have that discussion here today to give guidance and direction to staff on whether we do want to include capital requests as part of our grant program. You know, we've discussed, or we've, at least there was some discussions around privately owned assets versus public goods, and I think the distinction should be made between whether or not the public is using a private good, regardless of whether it's private. And someone brought up, well, Councillor Jarvis brought up, of course, the docks. I think he also brought up the MacTier Legion. Full disclaimer, I'm not advocating for Legion here. I'd be in a conflict of interest, but as an example, you know, when you look at their facilities, it's used by the school, it's used by locals, it's used for events. And so for us to say, because it's a privately held good, we're not going to support you, I think that would be very short-sighted of council. We should consider a policy around capital requests, and I think we should provide guidance to staff here today. Thank you.
There I am talking to myself again. Sorry. I think I agree with what you said, Councillor Graziano, but I do think with capital, we have to be very careful, because that can get, let me call it, out of hand. And, you know, in other words, using the example of docks, we probably have, and I have no idea, but I'm going to guesstimate that we have maybe 10 associations out there who own docks. So if we start funding one dock, then we have to be prepared to fund 10, I would argue, and we should debate that. And I'm not saying that yay or nay, but all of a sudden, I could imagine us deciding that, okay, we're handing out $1,000 each to 10 associations each year for the coming eternity on dock maintenance, because we decided that you know, I just think we have to be careful. But I think, you know, when you mention something like the Legion, you give a prime example of an association, basically a nonprofit association, to the best of my knowledge, that serves the public as part of their mandate. And you know, and I think, you know, so I just think if we're going to do capital, we have to do it carefully. And I will, and Mr. Sokash was obviously making reference to the program that I'd understood in the past, and I thought having something similar to that going forward makes a lot of sense, because I don't think we want to have a string of people coming in front of us and telling us how much people enjoy their regattas or their summer camps or their swimming lessons, because we know that. We just have to, have them fill out the forms and have us have a policy that says we're going to do a maximum of $1,000 per summer camp or $500 per regatta or whatever rules you put in there, so that we don't spend a lot of time listening to people telling us something that where we already know what our answer is going to be anyway. That's my thought. Ms. Anderson, you have more questions? Or should we go to Councillor Hazelton first?
I was just to answer Mr. Graziano's point.
Yes.
If you could look at item number 3, municipal grants, part 3 on page 2, it's kind of at the top of page 2, and it details capital grants. And if you can let me know if that definition needs improvement or whether you find it suffices. I think it covers some of the points that you've asked, and that's been talked about in general at this table.
It's yes, in a very general sense,
Mhm.
but I think we may, as time goes forward, want to get more specific.
Yes, and the other one that I meant to speak to, which was for Mr. Pico, was that we do have, we will set a budget, for example, 20,000, and if we only have 18,000 that gets approved, then 2,000 will be left throughout the year for special requests. But it all depends on how many people request these funds, and how much gets approved in the budget is how much we'll have left over for throughout the year incidentals. So that is built into this policy as well.
Yeah. Councillor Hazelton.
Thank you. I just wanted to build on what you were, I think, trying to get to, Mayor, and that is that there probably needs to be some guidance here. I think we open up ourselves to, possibly endless requests if it's of a capital nature. And then we have, for example, communities, as you know, like Honey Harbor, who have completely funded all of their, community center without any government, without any municipal funds. And we have other municipalities who are seeking municipal funds. And so if we open up that door, then I can see every municipality who has previously funded their own projects saying, well, let's jump on the bandwagon and get municipal funds. And we got a lot of communities in our township, and I think that will take us down the wrong path. I think what we have seen, though, is in the past we have leveraged these grants for, we'll call it broad community interests, generally where the young people are being encouraged to participate and get involved in the communities. And I think whether it be recreation programs or regattas or identifying frogs or whatever the case might be, I think those are probably the targets that we should be focused on, personal opinion. But if we're going to be delegating this initial screening to staff, then I think we have to be fairly clear about what these guidelines are, so that when they receive the applications, they're able to provide an initial scrutiny of them and bring that summary to council for a fairly quick, call it expeditious approval, as opposed to having us spend hours listening to each individual application. Thank you.
I think you raised a very important point in regards to the age of the beneficiaries, if I use that term, of any of these fundings. I think that's something well worth considering. Any other comments at this stage? Councillor Fedko again.
Very briefly, I think under the grants for protecting, rehabilitating the environment, we may want to add education as well. But as we continue this conversation around capital projects versus the others, I think it's the outlier. Everything else benefits community development, people individually and as a group. The capital projects are a different nature, and I would suggest they would be better off in a different policy.
Mr. Sokash and Mr. Mariotti. Mr. Sokash first.
Okay, thank you. Hopefully I'm not going to get the evil eye from Mr. Mariotti here. I'm just trying to put together a bit of a summary to discuss with Julie, and if you don't mind, I'd like to kind of make sure that I'm on the right track here. I think council is looking for a similar policy to what we had with respect to dollar limits, so $1,000 or $1,500 for events and programs. Expanding the eligibility. Before it was only cottage associations, but now we'd be looking at other groups. Very limited capital. The reason I'm saying limited and not zero is we do have requests come in for $100 or $200 for paddles or something like that. So I think council would want us to be able to do that at a staff level and not have to deal with it yourselves. And the last item that I'm kind of clear, not clear, is different pots of money. So one pot of money for the community groups and one for education and environment or something along those lines, or I don't know. Perhaps you could clarify that. Or if I'm totally out to lunch, that's fine as well.
No, I think you're eating from the same table. But I can't help but make the comment that no self-respecting accountant would capitalize a $100 or $200 paddle. I mean, I don't consider those capital. Anyway, CEO Mariotti, did you give Mr. Sokash the evil eye?
No, Mayor Coetzee, I didn't this time.
This time. All right.
No,
Sorry, go ahead.
it sounds like what might make sense is that yeah, we don't want, you know, delegations for 500 here, 1,000 there, but equally council would like to have some form of visibility as to what council is going to be approving. So before, you know, before staff even gives the green light to any association, we'd like, you know, to install a deadline by which the association sends us their requests. We will then compile that, summarize that, provide that in a single document to council, and then council can then, you know, pick, you know, yay, nay, or something else. So we can maybe clarify that in the document if that helps. And in terms of capital, maybe we just say if anyone wants any capital, you know, capital funding, then you come as a delegation to council, because capital is should be more than, like you say, Mayor Coetzee, more than just a couple of $100 deck boards. So yeah.
Thank you. Councilor Wojcik.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, and since we're in Cow and this is kind of a discovery stage here and we're allowed a little more freedom, and I am not an accountant or an expert in finance, so I'd like a little bit of understanding here related to this. Capital projects and capital expenditures that are granted usually service an asset. And those assets aren't the township's assets, they belong to someone else. So if we fund something in a capital project, it's different if we fix the docks at the Port Severn Park or on 6 Mile Lake Landing or whatever. But if we offer the funding to say, I think Councillor Jarvis here said something about some docks needed at the church or whatever, that's not our asset. That's their asset. And it's at their disposal. They could get us to fix up all their docks and they could sell the property. So I don't have an understanding of how this really works, and I think it should be separated, as I believe the mayor said, that capital projects should have a different understanding than just grant money for events and swimming lessons and that kind of stuff. So I don't have a very good understanding, so maybe I need to sit with Julie in finance and just understand better spending public money on private assets, because I don't understand it. This probably isn't the form to do it. So And liability, actually, there's a lot of things, so. If anybody here in Cal can kind of help me out with this, that's great, because we are in Cal, and maybe somebody could answer that question for me.
How about Councillor Graziano?
Thank you. On Councillor Bocek's comments, I a bit of a idea that I'd like to present before council, and perhaps it has legs, perhaps it doesn't. Rather than choosing some arbitrary amount of money that the applicant is seeking for a capital budget or a capital subsidy, why not in our policy hard bake a percentage relative to 3 quotes that they've received for the repair that they are looking to achieve? So we're not funding the whole amount of repair, whether it be a repair, rather we're offering a percentage, and in order for them to be eligible, they need to submit 3 quotes to council as part of their delegation to prove that they've almost kind of gone out to a quasi RFP, if you want to call it that. But again, our policy identifies a percentage and a percentage only. Just my thoughts. Thank you.
Councillor Jarvis.
Yeah, just responding to Councillor Graziano's comments, that if we were to use the pickleball courts as an example, that's an amount of money we would not have granted. Obviously, under this type of process, they would have had to bring a delegation, but they brought a delegation indicating they already had or could raise a significant amount of money towards the courts before they even came and made a presentation to us. I know that in the case, and we'll go back to this example of the church community church docks in Cognachine. And yeah, granted, it could, that's a piece of property that could conceivably be sold down the road. But the community would never imagine, though it'd be nice, that they could get all the funding to do the docks from, say, the municipality without first committing a specific or a lot of money of their own or with communities to match on that project. So I mean, council will have the ultimate say on any of these applications anyway, whether it's capital or community programming. And I think that what we can do is require when these applications come in at a certain point, say, yeah, that's a good, I mean, yeah, you need $100,000. We're not going to be able to cough it up when at that level. If you need that $5,000 and we've only got $2,500 to give you, then you got to cough up the rest. I mean, we got a fair bit of say in this, no matter how we look at it. If you look at those guidelines, I don't mind it coming back to us based on clarifications provided to Brad here, but a lot of it's pretty clear as you read it through.
Mr. Sogash? I see your lips moving.
I want everybody else to know except you, Your Worship.
Oh, well, okay. It's not the first time I've been excluded.
One thing I'd like to clarify from our perspective is I believe the previous policy, and I think this policy was written with the intention that staff could award certain dollar limits without it coming to council in order to make things a bit simpler for council. I think I've heard a couple councillors now say that the ultimate decision is with council. And I would like a clarification on that, whether there's a certain limit that you would like staff to be authorized to do, or does everything come to council? Because in the past, I believe we were trying to avoid bringing everything to council. Thank you.
Well, and I think there's 2 stages of whether or not it comes to council. One is whether or not a delegation is required. And secondly, whether or not do we go to the level that no delegation is required, but we approve the final list that staff has recommended? Or thirdly, that we're not even aware of it, staff's taking care of the whole thing. Those are 3 different levels. I think what's important here, from what I'm listening to, is that I'd be much more comfortable if we whoops, some bug flying in front of me. If we remove the capital from the policy, and therefore have the limits built in, much like Mr. Sokash was suggesting. And because I also think with capital, First of all, if I can go back to Councillor Jarvis, there's a significant difference between pickleball courts and church docks, in that the pickleball courts belong to the township if they get built, and that the residents were offering to make a contribution towards the expense that the township would face getting them built, whereas the church docks belong to the church or the Cognition community. So I think that's a significant difference. And I'm also concerned, as much as I understood the merits of Councillor Graziano's suggestion, I don't think in this policy we want to get that complicated. I think that's actually what he's suggesting might be more of a guideline if somebody's going to come with a capital project, that, you know, we give them the understanding that under normal circumstances, we do not fund more than 25% of the capital project, or whatever the rule we come up with or guideline. I think that makes some sense, but I find myself thinking that maybe we should remove capital from this particular draft policy and have a separate, possibly a separate policy for capital projects in the future. Because I mean, if you have a capital project worth anything these days, getting $1,000 or $2,000 from the township won't make that much difference. Not when your dock's going to cost $100,000, and then if you need 3 of them, that's going to be $300,000. You know, whatever. You know what I mean? Like, it's I think this policy is to cover, you know, $500, $1,000, $1,500 grants, not capital level grants. That's my personal suggestion. Mr. Sokash.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a couple questions of clarification. I think you answered one of them, totally remove capital. Are you looking for a separate policy with respect to capital? And my second question is, are you looking for an amount to be in the yearly budget for capital for council to decide on the expenditure?
My gut reaction is no. And the reason I say that is because I don't want to have a policy of how we're giving capital money away to everybody. I'd like them to be one-off applications. But that's me. That's not council, it's me. Councilor Jarvis.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think any capital project is going to require significantly more funds than what we're perceiving is going to be available through this grant policy anyway. So let's remove capital from it entirely, and it'd have to be a presentation here in front of us over why they need the money and how much they need.
Councilor Predko, followed by Councilor Wojcik.
And I would agree. And just to go back to Mr. Sokach's earlier question about the different categories and having, I think once we remove capital, it's all a pool. But I think if we're talking about limits for events versus programs, that's a different issue. But I don't think we have to worry about anything other than, you know, once capital's not in the picture. And your example about nets or paddle, you know, pickleball paddles, that would follow under the category of recreation programs.
All right. Lots of good discussion. And oh, sorry, Councilor Wojcik, I appreciate the reminder. But I also appreciate if you turn your mic on.
I was just wanting to support your comments and also say that I don't think there's a need for a budgeted amount for capital expenses. And I'll quote Pat Edwards, who's a former councillor of this council, who said, anytime you set money aside in a fund, council will find a way to spend it. And he's very true.
To say nothing of our residents.
Yeah. If you have a pot of money sitting there, people will find a way to spend it.
Okay, Councilor Predko.
Thanks for your indulgence, Your Worship. The one other thing we haven't discussed, and I don't think I've seen it in the policy, is the number of times an organization can come back to the pot in one fiscal year.
Yeah, I mean, I think there should be, because I made that mention earlier, a limit per association. Because if they want more, then they have to talk to council. CEO Mariotti.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Coetzee. Yeah, I think, and that's one of the reasons why you want to put a deadline in each year, is such that you have one application per year, and that's it, to try and prevent these kind of repeats. Yeah. We do realize that there will be some last minute additions, like the Rock the Dock, for example. So we know that will inevitably happen, but we want to discourage that so that we're not coming back and forth every time to deal with these things.
Okay, I'm suggesting we have a good conversation, and our clerk has been so nice to suggest a modified motion, which would read, be it resolved that Committee of the Whole receives the report regarding the municipal grant policy, and that staff report back with an updated draft of the municipal grant policy. And that would be moved by Councillor Predko and seconded by Councillor Jarvis. Council, do you think we've discussed this enough for now? Then I'll say all in favor. And that is carried. All right, I think that's a good discussion, and I think our staff is a little more informed of what we'd like to achieve with this. Committee terms of reference policy. That's the next on our list, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. As everyone knows, we received training in July that talked about our roles, our procedures, our policies, that type of thing, and how we approach different things at council. This is one of other reports to come forward about changes that we can do to improve our processes and policies. But this one kind of ties into our procedural bylaws, so I thought I would start with this one. And the biggest thing being that some of the terms are outdated within our current policy for our committee terms of reference, such as the term ad hoc isn't referenced really anymore in the Municipal Act. And our committees of council structure aren't as necessary for some of our committees that we have now, and we may be better off having working groups, which is a more informal approach, gives us more flexibility, allows us to do away with the appointment bylaws of memberships, allows us to call meetings more quickly, and have that information be reported back to council in a more timely manner. So staff's recommendation that we remove 3 of the committees that are currently existing in our committee terms of reference. That being the MACT Arena Advisory Committee, the Planning Advisory Committee, and the Sustainable Communities Advisory Committee, and have them be turned into working groups instead. That'll be staff-led, obviously with some members of council, not quorum, in attendance for those of interest. And then we can move forward with some of the projects that are held up or have been held up this year through some of our hands being tied through the policies and our procedures that we need to adhere to in these manner. The Committee of Adjustment and the Property Standards Appeal Committee are legislated, and so those would remain within the committee terms of reference. So that is staff's ask today to amend the policy.
Well, thank you very much. I think we appreciate your quick response to some of the education that we've received recently. Councillor Graziano.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you, a few questions, if I may, to the clerk. My understanding, and maybe my understanding is incorrect, perhaps you can provide some clarity on it, is that a working group would not have an opportunity to bring resolutions forward, but a committee of council can. Is that correct?
That's correct. So committees of council would provide recommendations, so to speak, but their version of a resolution that would be brought forward and adopted by council. We've had this in the past with some success and some detriment because there isn't necessarily a review process in the same way. So there's pros and cons to that, but the committees could still, the working groups could in theory make a presentation to council or something if necessary.
And on that note, I'm wondering whether the Arena Advisory Committee, given the nature of what we are hoping to achieve with the committee, would be best suited as a committee of council rather than a advisory group. I think its intent originally was to look at more creative ways of getting it utilized more, while at the same time trying to reduce the fiscal deficit that we run year over year with the actual arena. And in that context, I wonder whether or not the recommendations of the committee or what would be a committee would be better suited to come through council by way of their own version of a resolution versus a recommendation that would then through a delegation be heard and then have to be discussed. So just my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Bocheck.
Thank you. And through you, Mr. Mayor, this is not the report I was hoping to read this month. I had asked that we have a discussion about the revamping or the revising of the planning committee, but then at the same time, I receive a resolution and report saying they want to remove it and make it into a working group. Planning concerns are the #1 agenda item at this council. And I really don't see a reason to remove the planning committee and make it into a advisory group. I think it's a group of professionals that need to carry on business and bring recommendations to COW through the form of a resolution, and then let COW and then finally council make the decision on the recommendations. But I think it's very important we have the planning advisory committee as a committee of council with 2 appointed councillors to it. I think that's a no-brainer, and I think that has to remain, but it's the choice of council.
Oh, I was still muted again. Councillor Hazelton. Sorry about that. I was hoping you could lip read.
Sorry. So when I first read this, I thought not great, and then I read it again and I thought actually great. I was trying to imagine how findings or recommendations from a working group could come to council, and then I thought about it further and I thought we're going to have councillors likely on each of these working groups, certainly in the MacTier Arena group and the planning committee group. And we as councillors, we know that we can bring resolutions forward. And so I can easily see how as a result of a working group that the 1 or 2 councillors who may be in attendance could craft a resolution that would bring things forward. And we can bring those to council, not just to committee of the whole. And so I thought, wow, that gives us all kinds of additional power and capabilities that we don't have today. And it's driven through councillors in this process. So I thought that was a good thing. I'm a little bit concerned. I'm trying to figure out in my mind, and this is waffling, but thank God we're in committee of the whole. The planning committee, as Councillor Bocheck said, is an extremely important committee. And I think that there is an element of status or not entitlement, but status, if you will, of the people that we ask to be on the committee or the people who volunteer to be on the committee, and we select and we assign them to that committee. I think that there's value in that process, specifically on the planning committee side, because the people that we are bringing to that committee or that are ultimately appointed to that committee are usually of extremely high caliber, planning, legal background, and bring great value to our township. What I'm frustrated with that formal committee structure, and I'll outline this in the context of what we haven't done this year. We haven't done anything on the planning committee this year because we have a belief that there needs to be somebody from the planning department guiding and directing and maybe stick handling the planning committee for the topics that we might discuss. And my blunt comment is, I don't think there needs to be any of that. In fact, I will tell you, as chair of the planning committee from the previous term, the members of the planning committee, who are really, really senior people, were quite offended where they were getting planning 101 training at the beginning of a planning session before we could talk about a particular subject. So I think that somehow there needs to be an ability, again, back to, I think there's value in this formalized structure of a planning committee, but I think there needs to be an ability of the planning committee to operate more like this working group, where we don't have to have high structure associated with it, where we can ask these experts who are part of the planning committee to offer their opinions, and then somehow with the one or two counselors that are on the committee, we bring back the value of those discussions in the form of a resolution without burdening our planning staff. That's the last thing that we want to do. We want the planning staff that we have to be able to go off and do the things that they need to do. And I'm not saying all topics planning related, but many topics planning related could be handled with no participation from our planning department and bring great value back to our township. So as I say, I'm struggling with how to net this thing out, because I like in some respects the concept of the formal structure of a committee, but I hate the formalities that we have had to live under, where we have had to burden staff time, both clerical and planning, before we can even have a conversation with these known experts in law and planning. I'll pause there. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Predko.
Sorry, my hand, it was actually up on purpose. I thought it was by accident. My train of thought was lost. It's one of those days where we're all getting derailed. Yeah.
You want me to go to Councillor Jarvis and then come back to you?
Yeah, that'd be wise.
Okay, Councillor Jarvis. Please.
At least I can remember Councillor Predko's last name now. Well, brain farts after lunch. I think it's par for the course. I was Councillor Graziano, Hazelton. This is, yeah, I know you're over there somewhere. Actually illustrated my thinking very nicely. But then I looked at the analysis, and it says a working group by definition is a group of people appointed. So we're appointing a working group to look after specific issues that we want that working group to look at. I think that's the good part on that side of things. And I think I was struggling too, because how is a working group going to bring things back to council? I think Councillor Hazelton made it very clear in his explanation there, which is great. I think a working group actually, just by virtue of the fact that we haven't had a planning committee be able to meet, if we had a working group, they would have met by now. They would have been doing things by now at our request. And I think that's the advantage to having the working group. So that's why I like it. I just need clarification. If it's by definition, a group of people appointed to study, et cetera, who does the appointing would be my question.
If I may, Your Worship, I think the appointing would depend on the committee and or the group and its purpose. So it could, in the planning circumstance that might be a bit more of a formal process, or having people apply, or ensuring that there's qualifications there. If we're looking for community input on a new park or playground, then it might just be staff going out or council going out and identifying certain key community members, such as like mom and tot groups or educators or other parents or local community members within, like, for example, like MacTier or something like that, right? So I think in that approach, it can be much more casual. I think it would depend, but it makes it easier and faster for us to meet for sure.
I think just with concerns that came from Councilor Graziano with regards to the McTier Arena committee, I mean, that's extremely important committee as well, and I think would be in a very important working group for feedback. But I guess that's the again, the question comes up as to how you appoint that group. But I think you've given me an answer. Thank
you. Councillor Predko, do you want to, has any thoughts come back to you for expression at this point, or do you want me to move on to CEO Mariotti?
No. As soon as Councillor Jarvis started speaking, of course, it came back to me. And of course, it was the same topic. So
well done, Steve, to Steve.
So really, my question is again around appointments and really with relation to the MacTier Arena group. So when we're talking about appointments, are we going to be having a bylaw in council for appointments for working group, or is that taken care of by the department head and it's not the same formal level of council decision on composition of that group?
There wouldn't be a formal bylaw appointing the members. Generally, if you left to the department head who's running that working group for whatever project they're involved in, I guess it could be council led depending on the circumstance. But again, like going back to the planning advisory one, I think there's certain ones that perhaps it would be relevant and necessary for us to bring forward a list of recommendations or names to reach out to.
So to continue on that thought, with the arena group, there may be times when we're on this committee when we want the input of people who aren't currently on the committee and adding somebody, or if somebody is leaving the group, it would be a less formal process than going back to council and having to have a reappointment and reapplication process. So it would be able to be more dynamic and flexible on that front.
That's correct, yes.
Thank you.
CEO Mariotti, you put your hand down.
I think most points have been covered. It's the flexibility which is nice to be able to have. And yes, to Councillor Hazelton's point, some members could meet if there is a staffing issue. At least with a working group, we don't have to have formal procedural aspects to it in terms of having a secretary, issuing minutes and so on and so forth. So if a working group would like to meet, there's absolutely no reason why there can't be any interaction with a member of staff that is assigned to that particular working group who can maintain that link. And there's absolutely no reason why council also can't ask that member of staff who's dealing with that working group for an update either. So it's much more fluid and dynamic, and I think it might generate a lot more discussion because you can bring people in and out. And I know Mr. Sokash has been wanting to get this going in one form or another because he would like to consult with some members of a working group, or if council wants to keep the committee. But having a working group, Mr. Sokash is able to go out there and talk with various other professionals in whatever industry we want to talk about, and maybe bring those professionals to the working group. So anyway, it just adds a layer of flexibility.
Yeah, I mean, I find that that's one of the things that I really appreciate about the proposal of a working group is all of a sudden a lot of the rules and regulations around these groups are gone. We don't need the clerk. We don't need to have things recorded in certain ways. We don't need to have the formal appointments. We don't have to worry about the conflicts of interest in the same way. And I think that's also can be very valuable because some people with conflicts of interest may have important input on certain areas. I mean, I also recognize that a few months ago, Councillor Cooper created a planning group that was not appointed by council to come up with a review and offer information to council. And that information was received. It wasn't a motion or resolution or whatever you want to call it to go in a specific direction, but it was additional information received for our consideration. So I frankly, the flexibility of the working groups and the ability to create them rather quickly and not worry about all the formalities. I mean, we had recently, we were talking about appointing people to the MacTier Arena group, and then we had to go back into closed session and talk about a change or an addition or a subtraction. I can't remember the details, and if I could, I can't report an open anyway. But the point is, with a working group, that could have been a phone call or two, and that's settled. And to me, that's very important, because I think the way I perceive working groups is really how we actually wanted our committees to a fair extent to operate. I also think it's very useful that if it turns out that that working group has a councillor or two on them that could be the spokesperson to council or a staff member. I mean, that you'd have to decide on a particular group, but I'll use the example of the library. We usually have one of our council representatives give us a quick update of what's going on at the library when appropriate. I mean, I think it's important that however we create the working groups, that the working group agrees as to who's the, let me call it, spokesperson. And if it's a working group that Mr. Sokash put together, and he may have one or two counselors on it, but he might decide, or the group might decide, well, actually, he's the best spokesperson to come back with a report to council, then it's him. Or maybe the group decides that it's Councillor Graziano, who happens to be on that group, is the best spokesperson. I mean, that's up to the group. I didn't vote for you, Councillor Graziano. I said, maybe. It's up to the group, not to me. But no, seriously. So I really like this. I like this approach. I appreciate the work that the clerk and her department has done on this. And I think it also, as mentioned, it allows something like the planning, what was the planning advisory committee. I wouldn't be surprised if many of those members are interested in becoming a planning working group, and they can meet. They don't need to formalize it, and they can make a report via a council member or via a staff member to council with suggestions. So I don't see too much downside in going to this approach, I guess is what I'm saying. That's my take. Okay, Councillor Wojcik.
Well, certainly listen to what you had to say here. And I think, for a lot of our groups that are I'll call them fringe groups, because we've had a few, advisory groups, the KEG in Honey Harbor, etc. That's fine. And I'm willing to support these advisory groups in this resolution, except for the planning committee. I would like to remove the planning committee from this report and wait until such a time that we have a new planning director in place and we discuss with the new planning director how he sees his department moving forward and how he can utilize a planning committee to his advantage and get his thoughts on this. I really do believe the planning committee needs to be a committee of council. It needs to be formalized. It has to have the process. The meeting shouldn't be at Tim Hortons in the back corner with a few members. This needs to be a formal committee of council, because our number one priority outside of the environment is planning, which has to do with the environment. So I'm willing to move ahead with this and have this go to council for approval, but until we have a good conversation with our new planning director, I don't want to make any commitments to an advisory committee without his input. I hope that's clear enough for everyone.
I know I understood it. Councillor Graziano, please.
Thank you, through your worship. I think in some contexts, the advisory group, or excuse me, the advisory group, but the working group makes sense. I absolutely am an advocate for agility and expedience, and being able to be nimble and make decisions quickly. And we know that the township and municipalities don't tend to do things quickly. So in that context, yes, absolutely. But there is some credibility to what Councillor Hazelton said earlier on with respect to a certain level of status that comes with a committee of council. And I look at things from a recruitment perspective and say, are we going to have an easier time recruiting top quality people when the perception is that this is a committee of council and it's going to actually matter versus, whether it's just going to be a presentation to council and noted for that, but perhaps no resolution following through, such as the Councillor Cooper example earlier. The other thing I think it's worth mentioning, and Mayor, you brought this up earlier, you touched on this, but you didn't really endeavor to elaborate on it. And I think I want to build on this, is that there are certain times where being in camera and having minutes recorded are going to be relevant and something for public consumption, as well as for, transparency and public awareness. Whereas at times, perhaps it's not necessary, and a working group would, of course, not be under the purview of the public and open to the public. And so to Councillor Bocek's point, I would agree with him on the planning council side of things and say that planning council absolutely must stay as a committee of council. But I would also go so far as to say that the advisory committee for the arena should be something whereby those at a MAC tier who want to have an update can come to our council website and look at the minutes to understand what is happening, because this is going to affect the community as a whole. And I feel that at the end of the day, they should have access to that information, as well as we should try at our best to recruit the best possible people. So I would absolutely agree that perhaps in going forward with new committees, that there be a consideration for a working group. But I'd like to see at least the Arena Advisory Committee and the Planning Council Committee stay as is. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hazelton.
Thank you. So when I read this report here and I read the working group as a definition of a group of people appointed, I'm thinking on one hand, how different is that than a committee? We appoint people to a committee. We're going to apparently appoint people to a working group. And I see our clerk is wanting to respond to that, and I'll pause there and welcome the response.
Sorry, if I may, and I will take ownership of this by not maybe clarifying. When we appoint to a committee, we appoint via bylaw, which is a very formal, stringent process. We can appoint people to a working group by, making a collection of, these are the types of people we want to see. So for example, if we want, the MAC Arena one, we could have said, like, we want the user groups, we want the people who rent it, we want the locals in the community, right? So we could have gone out and collected those people, that's a bad choice of words. Reach out to them, gather them into a room, and say by way of, this is what we're looking for, they're appointed, and it's a much more casual process. So I wish, having heard how my report's being interpreted, that I had maybe clarified that a little bit better.
I appreciate that. And so this is a moving target, so to speak. On one hand, I like the formalities. And I think we've already had a few comments about the value of the formalities of, for example, in the planning committee, appointing people, etc. I like the formality of our code of conduct applying to the committee members, and I'm wondering if a working group have people appointed, does that mean we might need to change the words in our code of conduct so that it's not just committee member, but also working group member? I'll pause there and let you tell us.
So this is one of the things that the legislation's kind of changed as to why our policy is outdated. So working groups believe volunteers are members, therefore the code of conduct cannot apply to them. So the code of conduct would only apply to members of committees.
But committees are volunteers.
They are.
So I'm struggling to understand the differences and similarities.
I
mean,
there's a lot of gray.
I
Is
get
that helpful?
Well,
That's not
I get
helpful.
that, but what I would not like to see is a working group where people don't have a respect for the code of conduct and conflicts of interest. And I don't know how that gets blended in there. But I don't like the committee structure that has so much structure that makes it difficult to go off and do productive things without burdening township staff. So like I'm just struggling with this whole concept. I really like the idea of a more nimble working group concept, be able to get people together, not burden the township staff, have a vehicle to bring back valuable information to the council. That's all really good stuff, but I don't think we want to lose the value of transparency to the community of the people that are on those working groups and committees, being held to a higher standard of ethics and integrity when they're doing things and bringing value to the township. Yes.
If I may, your worship, if that's.
You may.
Thank you. I completely understand the concern because there isn't a process necessarily in place to hold those people formally accountable if there was any type of pecuniary interest or something to that effect. Because they're working groups, because they're just community members, they wouldn't have direct authority to make any decisions. So therefore they wouldn't necessarily have any types of pecuniary interest. I would like to think, and I would like to hope that anyone who's coming to provide input or feedback in a working group would, respect the people amongst the room, and, we wouldn't have any issues with decorum. So I understand that there's a bit of a conundrum there, and I don't have an answer for you. That's kind of one of those things that's the difference between the two of them, and you need to figure out what's appropriate and not appropriate depending on the circumstance. But what I can tell you is if the MACT Arena Advisory Committee and the Sustainable Community Advisories Group weren't formal committees of council, I'm certain they would have met already. And we would have made progress, and that information feedback would have come back either through council or through a staff report, and the direction and recommendations from that group would have, led Brad down a couple of roads of, hi Brad, sorry, led Brad, you just heard his name, he's like, what? Led Brad, down a couple of roads of examples to report back to be like, these are the ideas or concepts, what direction does council want to go in, and then can come back with more information. And that process could have definitely already been underway, both for projects in MACTIR and for Jen with the Sustainability Advisory Committee. But because we've been tied to this process, we haven't been able to do that. So that's the information, but really, I mean, it's council's decision on which one should be a formal committee of council, if they should all be formal committees of council, or where that balance is depending on the circumstance.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Schneider.
Thank you, Chair Coutier. If this is going to travel down a path that some committees are going to turn into working groups and other ones are not, then I'm requesting that the Sustainable Community Advisory Group also become a committee of council, for the code of conduct is extremely important to this group. And I realize that this will cause a delay. But with the environment being priority number one, I would imagine that any recommendations from this committee would be best suited if it came through council.
we now have had representatives from the 3 committees all saying they want to remain a committee. And yet what I heard from our clerk just now is that if we didn't have such a formal structure, these committees would already be meeting. And that bothers me. It bothers me when we are, and I know it's a municipal reality, I get that, but it still bothers me when structures, rules, procedures, bureaucracy stands in the way of getting somewhere. And I'm a little disappointed in that I'm thinking, here's an opportunity to try to make things a little more efficient, a little more effective, help us get farther down the road. And I'm learning that a number of councillors like the structure. So it's an interesting dilemma in my mind. I'm going to go. I don't think Councillor Jarvis has spoken in the second round yet.
You have a legitimate question.
I beg your pardon?
I do have a legitimate question for our clerk.
Well, all your other questions aren't.
No, they aren't. Mine is the only one that's legitimate. I can guarantee you.
Go.
At this time of day, I'm sure it is. I have a question with regards to the chart that was provided. It indicates there's a chart below that details 5 committees listed within the terms of reference policy, and then it gives the committees. It says required by legislation, yes, no, whatever. New this term of council, yes, no, or whatever. And then terms of reference membership. And it says council member 4 on committee of adjustment. I'm not sure I understand that. We're supposed to have 4.
Apologies, that column is reversed.
So it should be 2 members of
I think it
council
reversed
4.
all of them now that I'm looking at it. My apologies, that entire column is reversed.
Okay.
So
See, that was a working group.
You mean the entire rows?
I'm so sorry.
Every quorum
I'm
and
just
every
gonna say
working
I'm not in finance for a reason. Numbers aren't my forte. Now that I'm looking at it, I think the whole column is reversed. So there would be
Okay.
reverse counsel in public in that entire chart. My apologies.
Okay, then apropos of comments regarding code of conduct, could we not require that working groups adhere to our code of conduct? Could that not be part of our? policy?
But
No?
one of the things I heard from our training session last month was one of the reasons they had created working groups in Ottawa is because sometimes they very intentionally went out with people who would otherwise consider have a code of conflict. Wasn't it baseball diamonds or something he used as an example? If memory serves, and
That's
and
correct, yes.
and their equivalent of Mr. Sokash talked to 4 people who manufacture baseball diamonds. Well, that was a clear conflict of interest, and yet from the 4 of them, apparently they collected a lot of useful information. So I think that's where we have to be a little bit careful.
Recommend that we do that with any council appointed working groups. Wouldn't that make sense? I mean, if we're talking about, for instance, the planning working group or the sustainable working group or whatever, if it's a committee, a working group that we have assembled as council, then maybe the code of conduct could apply in those circumstances. Just a thought.
I just think it's my understanding, and I would have to double check this, but it's my understanding that the integrity commissioner can only go after, report, investigate on council members and formal committees members. So that's kind of where, but I don't see why, I'm just thinking out loud here, so bear with me, but I don't see why we couldn't maybe have some type of policy, like a policy or something outlining what our expected decorum or respect within, and if you don't adhere to a certain level of behavior, then you're not invited back to the working group kind of thing, but there won't be an investigative process or a report to council on behavior or conflicts, etc.
This has been a lot of very useful conversation, but I'm not sure it's been terribly conclusive, unfortunately. Because I'm sensing that in spite of the advice received, that there is a certain appetite amongst some councillors for, let me call it status quo. But I'm also frustrated status quo hasn't been working very well for us, given that these groups, and I make reference specifically to the MacTier Arena Advisory Committee, the Planning Advisory Committee, and the Sustainable Committee Advisory Group. How often have any of those groups met this year? And to me, that's one of the things we need to overcome, one way or another, is that we feel a need for these three groups to do something, and they're not doing anything at the moment, not through any fault of theirs.
But since we're in Cow here and we have a little bit of a freedom to speak, we have not appointed a chair to any of these committees. So how could they call a meeting at the chair's direction?
First
Ms. May.
first meetings can be scheduled by the clerk, and then the chair is appointed at the first meeting.
All right.
Your worship, just as a final comment, and something that came to mind is Councillor, what's his name down here on my right? It's too late in the day. Bocek. Comment on the planning committee, and I think maybe we should be waiting until we've got a director of planning in place, so we have an idea of what his how he'd like to proceed. Yeah.
Councilor Predko, have you spoken this second round? I've lost track now.
No, I haven't. So if I have a chance, that'd be great. I think one thing that maybe the clerk could clarify, but I think I know the answer to, is that these working groups, there's no reason why we can't make them procedurally as similar as possible to a committee of council, where we can have minutes, we can have representation from the clerks attend the meetings. I think what we're really only avoiding is the issue with the conflict of interest guidelines, the appointment via bylaw of membership, and the resolutions that can be drawn from the committee. But I think we have workarounds for those things on the whole. I mean, other than the benefit of not having to have a bylaw for appointments. Am I wrong in that, or am I missing something?
No, for the most part, there's nothing saying you can't have minutes. They wouldn't adhere to the procedural bylaw in the same way, although we could maybe stipulate in the policy what terms they do adhere to and don't adhere to, from like if we want agendas published publicly, or how we want the minutes done, or if it's a much more casual adoption of the agenda at the start of the meeting, and it's kind of more fluid of a process as opposed to something set in stone. So there's definitely ways we could kind of pick and choose maybe what's more formal in that and not formal in that, perhaps.
So, I mean, if there's reluctance to go to working groups, I think procedurally we could make them similar if that makes them more attractive.
Mhm.
All right. Councilor Graziano.
I was just going to add again, I envision a working group to be something like, and had we had working groups at the beginning of the term, I would have recommended for a recruitment working group. Where best practices were discussed, where we could provide information to staff specifically around, different creative ways of attracting talent and hiring. But based on the two, at least that we've discussed here today, well, the three with SCAG included, but based on the two today, again, I think we are going to have credibility concerns if we remove the Arena Advisory Committee out of the Committee of Council and bring it into a working group. There's concerns with perhaps some people, and I just want to make sure that, when the community as a whole looks at what is being discussed, they perceive that to be with credibility. I also feel that the code of conduct is a big thing. I myself am not going to want to participate in a working group whereby I feel that there is going to be a lot of perhaps negative attitudes towards each other, and perhaps conflicts of interest where known people might stain the overall perception as well. So I think there's a reason for these committees of council, and yes, they may be slower in getting up to speed and starting up, but in the end, I think from a credibility standpoint, they really do resonate and really do provide value. So thank you.
Ms. Schneider, is your hand reappearing or is it the old hand, so to speak?
It reappeared. So just because we have a committee, the advisory group has to meet with the retrofit people with respect to the Federation of Canadian Municipalities on September 18th. So just to really take my clerk right over the edge, is it possible that we could do a working group in the interim while we are waiting for the committees to be established? Because I have these milestone dates that we have to meet for the grant, and I need these people together.
Well, at this point, the group does exist, is it not?
Yes, and we do have a council meeting before September 18th to pass an appointment bylaw.
Okay, well, then if that's the case, do you think it's possible that we could have that done in September so that we could still move ahead for September 18th?
Depending on how this resolution goes.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
I mean,
Hypothetically, yes.
Yes, and hypothetically, I should probably
mean-
not talk anymore.
when I look at this resolution or this motion in front of me, the third bullet point says remove 3 groups. All 3 groups don't want to be removed. So I'm not sure if I call for the vote that will necessarily get, we need, well, we only got 6 of us here. We still would need 4 people to carry because we need a majority, do we not?
Correct. You would still need 4 people.
And I don't believe
I'm
I'm going to
gonna-
get
I'm
4
gonna-
people.
For planning staff who aren't in the room, and maybe Greg, I do understand the rationale behind the planning advisory committee and waiting until we have a new director in place to address that committee. That makes perfect sense to me. And they haven't met, but they haven't met for different reasons than the MacTier Arena and the Sustainable Communities group. So this is my staff report and my recommendation standpoint, I completely understand and would support removing the planning advisory committee from this recommendation. But as well, I will take direction from committee and move forward how you wish.
Councilor Volchek.
Yeah, I would like to see the planning committee removed from this. I'm quite comfortable that we can have workarounds and we can create policies and procedures so that these advisory groups work within, Robert's rules, and you have a chair and you have a recording secretary. And I think we can get there. But with the planning committee, different ballgame as far as I'm concerned. I committed myself to this planning committee and I have in the past, and without a formal process, I think it'll become a carnival.
Okay, I'm going to stop.
I think we're dealing with professionals. And I think if you ask the members of the planning committee what they thought about having a formal committee of council or a working group, you would be surprised at how many would like the formality in this planning committee, because the issues are of such great importance. And the transparency should be of even greater importance that this stay as a committee of council, at least until we get advice from our new planning director.
So here's where we're at. We can have 3, 4, 5, 10 more rounds. Every single round of conversation, there's going to be a person who says, I can't vote for the planning committee to go away. or I can't vote for MacTier to go away, or I can't vote for sustainable to go away. That means every committee that we want to convert to a working group, we have an advocate who, with good reason, says, I don't want to get rid of this formality behind this committee at this time. And I don't want to frustrate our clerk because I think she was going in the right direction, but I also understand the worry that is attached to removing formalities around some of these committees. And I'm just wondering whether the best thing we can do with this is, much like we did with the earlier item on municipal grants, say let's keep working at it as opposed to passing a resolution one way or another. Because what I don't want to do is defeat this resolution, then we drop the whole topic. I think that would be unwise of all of us long term. Councillor Hazelton.
I think we're on the right track, and I think from what we've heard, there's enough interest to maintain the current committee that we have. And I think if I read between the lines, our clerk is looking for us to update the committee terms of reference to remove those two definitions that are no longer relevant. And I think that the inclusion of provisions for working groups will have great value going forward, even if they are not for the committees that we thought we might evolve into working groups. So if we took this resolution and stopped at the bullet, include provisions for working groups, I think we might have a win, a partial win.
Councillor Graziano.
Thank you, Worship. I'm concerned that if we don't address this today, two of the committees, well, at least one of them, will be in a further state of limbo until this matter reappears before COW or Council, which would be the advisory committee, further delaying its, its movement forward. As we heard, SCAG has some hard, date obligations, and if we move this motion here, or if we do rather refer it back to staff, it's just going to further delay these committees.
But I thought I heard from you that you did not want the MacTier Arena Advisory Group to lose committee status.
I do not.
Okay, so I don't understand how us not addressing it, we're addressing it by not changing it.
If we're maintaining, then great.
No,
I'm sorry, I thought we were going to read the resolution as it's read, which is the removal of them from their status.
But what my comment is, I know I'm confident that if I read it as read, for various reasons, it won't pass.
Understood. Thank you.
And
Is there an ability for us to take these individually and get council's blessing towards one way or the other? Like if you were to ask council, do you think that the committee for the planning committee should be a standing committee or a committee of council, and the majority of council says yes, then we know that we can remove that one. But the other two, if you pull the council, you may find out there is a flavor to turn the other two into working groups.
well, except that we've heard strong defenses as to why we shouldn't turn the other ones into working groups at this time.
Yeah, I think
so. Okay, Clerk Way.
From what I've heard, up until the end of bullet point 2, I think everyone is on the same page.
Yes.
So if that is one motion, that's fine and lovely. Then I think you would have to break the other 3 committees out into 3 separate motions.
I'm not interested in doing that because I don't want us to vote on each one individually and say, yes, we want this, or no, we don't want that, because I don't think that's fair to the members of those committees or to their representatives at this discussion, because we're basically then saying, okay, who made the best sales pitch? I don't want to do that. I think we should leave them as is for now, and we continue working on this project. Councillor Pegco.
Yes, and I'm in agreement through you, your worship, with that comment. I think if we remove those 3 and we allow Clerk Way to revise the committee terms of reference document, and we establish a working group for some purpose, we may want in the future to reevaluate whether or not these other committees would be better served as working groups or as committees. But I think without the definitions and the experience, we're probably not going to get there today.
No, and I think I agree with you fully. I think that if we include provisions for working groups in the revised committee terms of reference, that leaves us free at any time to call it decommittee an existing committee. And it could be that within the next month or two, somebody comes forward on one of these committees or something else and makes a proposal that we say, okay, no longer committee, now a working group. But let's not go, I don't want, we've been at this for a while. And I don't want to go through 3 separate votes where each individual who's defending a particular group gets to do it all over again. I don't think that's fair to all of us. And I don't think if we only pass the motion, the first half of the motion, the door is still open for making changes to those other committees sometime down the road. And I think it's quite possible that it will happen, but I don't think anybody's quite ready today to make that decision. So I'm going to propose, and Councillor Jarvis moved this, Councillor Graziano seconded it. I'm going to propose I just read up to the second bullet point and then call a vote on that. So I moved by Councillor Jarvis, seconded by Councillor Graziano. Be it resolved that the staff be directed to provide an updated committee terms of reference policy to council for consideration with the following amendments. Remove the definition of ad hoc committee, update committee definitions accordingly, and include provisions for working groups. All those in favor? All right, so that half is carried. I think we've had some good discussion. I'm sure some other discussions will follow from this. I think Clerk Way wants to go, dare I say it, half a dozen steps in a certain direction, and we've gone 3 steps in a certain direction, but at least we made a few steps. I hope, Clerk Way, you don't mind that overview.
We did bring up some pretty good points at Cal
Yeah.
here.
It's good discussion.
Yeah, great discussion.
One more discussion. Does anybody need a break? Good, I do, because I see various one of you get up and walk away, and I haven't done that, so I'm going to call a 5-minute break. All right. Shall we get on to our last item? Okay, our last item, new business, is garbage verification. Councillor Graziano.
Thank you, Your Worship. Contrary to the District of Muskoka's bylaws for garbage collection, site supervisors who allow access to our residents at district-run facilities have been asking our residents for verification to dispose of garbage without having to pay a fee. While somewhat understandable, ensuring that non-residents pay their fair share to dispose of their waste at our tax-funded sites and facilities, many residents have had to carry a copy of their tax roll information to provide residency or to prove residency. This requirement's a burden to most and does not mitigate the copying or sharing of these documents. At a minimum, as a current practice, the township issues parking passes, which I have here in front of me, to residents who request them. As an additional use case for these parking passes, the township has commenced a feasibility study to determine whether parking meters at public launches and parking locations beyond the Part 7 park would assist in recuperating some of those costs from non-residents that use our facilities, including garbage disposal. To simplify proof of residency requested at bin sites while bringing additional value to our parking passes, it may be prudent to create a double-sided pass, which on one side would have the township parking pass, whereas on the other side could perhaps have proof of residency accepted by the District of Muskoka transfer stations. And as we continue to eliminate open bin sites and move towards a model whereby they'll be supervised, I can only imagine that the request for proof will continue to rise, thereby creating an additional burden to residents that don't have a copy of their tax roll in their car. And as such, perhaps a solution such as this, or as easy as this, might be able to provide ease of use for our residents. Thank you.
Thank you. Does any staff want to respond to this before I turn it over to council?
Maybe I can kick things off, and then I can ask Mr. Sokash to maybe comment. Yeah, I think. I mean, I know that the few times that I have gone to the transfer station, a member of staff did ask for proof of residency. So, I mean, obviously living here, I have my driver's license. It's pretty straightforward. Clearly, for people who have second homes, they don't have something as simple as that, and therefore they'd have to bring their tax bill or something, some kind of documentary proof. I think if the district is really imposing this on a strict level, I think the district should be implementing, however they see fit, a form of justification for our residents to be able to drop materials off at our transfer stations. In the meantime, and again, we haven't heard many of these issues creeping up. In the meantime, what I might suggest is that our residents could simply take a picture of any proof of residency, or keep a photocopy of their proof of residency in their vehicle. Usually, everyone has their phone with them. So if you take a picture, I'm sure that the attendant wouldn't mind accepting that. But going back to, if the district is implementing this measure, it should really be on the district's dime to enforce and provide our ratepayers with some form of document. But in terms of the nitty-gritty of looking at the costs associated with doing a double-sided pass, I don't know, we'd have to go back and look at that. And I'm looking at Mr. Sokash, I see Mr. Sokash is quite pensive right now.
Mr. Sokash?
Thank you, Your Worship. Anything is possible. This just seems like it'd be quite difficult for us. First, we'd have to, I presume, get individual passes made for every property owner, whether they typically get a parking pass or not. That would be quite an expense, as right now we only get about 1,000 made up every year. And I don't know how many properties are in the township, but I believe it's several.
5,000 or so.
So there would be the cost associated with that. We'd have to confirm with the district, of course, whether they would accept these. And then there would have to be, I presume, an additional level of vetting prior to giving out the passes. Right now, we're somewhat loose on the distribution of them, but now this would be quite a different level of bureaucracy for something that for the parking passes was pretty straightforward and intended to be as seamless as possible. But again, anything is possible. This just seems like it would be quite a bit of work for what is really a district problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wojcik, please.
Thank you. And to just build a little bit on this, this is a district problem, but it's a problem for our residents. Our residents are the ones that have the problem. I support this, but I understand there's challenges involved with it. And one of the challenges, I think, is did we not offer parking passes to people that do not live in our township in order to use the parking facility at the park to attend fitness classes and things like that? Brad, can you just clarify that for me?
Through the mayor, no, we don't, but we do have, there's a time period where they're using the facility, which is really early in the morning, so there's not a lot of demand. So we have given them a code to get around it.
Okay. So, and I really think a report, a very comprehensive report, has to come back on this idea, because we can throw ideas out there like our CAO did, but I know my sister would more than happy to come over to my house with her phone and take a picture of my deed for my property and then go dump her garbage in our transfer station. So there's a lot of vetting and there's a lot of information here that needs to come back to council. But I truly believe there is a method, and the parking pass is one that I think could work at an expense that that would help our residents when they go to a transfer station or go to a bin site. I've had to turn around. I got to the Baxter transfer station. He wanted proof of my residency and I didn't have it. Wouldn't take it. Wouldn't take it. So, yeah, I believe this is a very worthwhile approach, and maybe the parking pass isn't the ideal thing, but there should be some sort of identification that's easy for our residents to use when they use any of our facilities.
Councillor Fredco.
Thank you, through you, your worship. I think what we're asking for is a cost and feasibility. At this moment, I don't think we're looking to foot the bill. I would hope that a common sense solution such as what CAO Mariotti has suggested would prevail at the end of the day. But if it doesn't, and our access to our sites gets more complicated, rather than having a two-sided parking pass, it might be a parking pass with an RFID chip that will open up a lock on the door or something. So paid by the district. So anyways, I'm hoping for today we could find out what the cost implications are. But again, I would still hope that we have a simple solution that is simple for our residents.
I'm curious, before I go to Councillor Hazelton, Councillor Wojcik was saying something about he wouldn't take it. He wouldn't take it. I don't know what that was that was not accepted as proof of residence.
The attendant at the Baxter Ward Community Center would not take my driver's license as proof of residency.
Well, then how else are you going to prove you? What
I went back a half an hour later with my business card from the district of Muskoka and handed him that, and he compared my name to the license, and I was able to dump my product off.
What was the address on your driver's license?
You know what? I can't give that out because there are people looking for me.
Okay. But can you, well, okay, maybe, but if your address isn't in the township, I'm a little bit concerned about other things too, but there you go.
I do have multi residents in different townships, and actually I've never checked my driver's license, but I think it has Bagley Road and Severn Township on it.
Oh, okay. Councillor Hazelton, please.
Thank you. I wanted to just offer that although we may think it's a district problem, I absolutely agree with Councillor Bochek's comment. It's our residents, therefore it's our problem. And we as council need to figure out how to solve this problem. And if we have to lobby district to solve the problem, yes, that's our job. But for us to think for 1 second that district will solve the problem for our residents, given the track record, they have no interest in solving any waste issues for our residents. And we've heard that for 5 years, probably a lot longer. So it's our problem. We need to figure out a solution to it. I don't know what the right solution is. I certainly don't want to be finding a solution that's a big burden. But one thing that I would like to understand is, how do we quantify the problem? We hear that there is garbage waste from non-residents making its way into our waste disposal locations. So I have some somewhat rhetorical questions. I'm not expecting any answers, but one question would be, if some of our residents share their credentials with their family and their family dump their garbage, is that going to be a significant contributor of additional waste in our township? I don't know. If external users, the occasional external user, got credentials from a local resident, how much of an issue would that be? In other words, are we talking about a huge problem from external residents who have no connection with the residents of our township? And is that where the problem is? Or is it because we're letting our friends dump their garbage in our waste disposal? I don't know what the issue is. Quite frankly, I'm insulated. I've learned a whole lot from talking to Councillor Graziano about this waste, issues that I've never even thought of before. Being out of the bay, having a marina, coming down to my marina, dumping the garbage. There's almost no violation of that environment. And if it is, it's probably so trivial nobody would care about it. But it sounds like we have a huge problem elsewhere in the township with external garbage, external waste. And I do believe we need to find a solution to it. And it would be nice to have it quantified. I don't know how we do that. It would be nice to know if the solutions that we're imagining here are really needed, or if a simple process, as I heard earlier, of taking a photocopy, or sorry, taking a picture on your phone of your credentials and maybe having your family do the same, so that anybody taking the garbage out, your kids, your siblings, whatever, if that solves the problem, then maybe that solves the problem. But I'm shocked at Councillor Bochek's experience. I haven't had those experiences. I've never been asked for identification when I go to the waste transfer site, but every time I go, it's always to deposit chargeable items. So they always make me pay no matter what, but don't have to pay at the marina. Anyways, thank you.
Councillor Graziano.
Thank you, Your Worship. Being local to the inland lakes that feed into Baxter Ward, many can attest to the fact that you have these scales on the left-hand side, and as you drive in, you enter onto the scales, you interact with the person with the driver or the passenger side window down, trying to send your phone over to the person and giving them your phone, and if that phone drops, that's going to be a whole big nightmare. Whereas just being able to wave this to them and say, there you go, and you're waved on through, far easier application. I do agree with Councillor Hazelton's comment specifically that it is our problem. Even though the district's responsible for waste collection, it is our problem. These are our constituents. It's a hassle to them. It's already a hassle that some in Port Severn are having to drive, 40 minutes round trip to drop off their garbage. Now they're getting hammered for tax roll information, even though the District of Muskoka's bylaws don't require proof of residency. They are. And this is just going to continue to proliferate as a problem as more and more of these facilities become supervised. I have not heard of any concerns yet on the South Gibson Lake Road transfer site, but that's not to say that it won't be happening soon. And I wonder whether staff could, in engaging their counterparts at district to determine whether or not this is even something that they would consider, look at perhaps getting or receiving some subsidies on behalf of the district to pay for the printing of these and the distribution. And if we do not want to send it out in our tax mailers that go out to constituents on a biannual basis already, and utilize that as a means in which to distribute these to each one of our ratepayers, then we can also look at, rather than burdening our staff here, perhaps delegating this to the library staff as well. Suffice it that the library staff would be open to adding this as one of their additional responsibilities and giving them the ability to hand these out to residents once they've verified that they are in fact a residence. So just my 2 cents. Thank you.
I want to make a couple of comments as well. First of all, we can debate whether it's our problem or district's problem. The fact is we're going to pay for it. Our residents are going to pay for it either way, because if the district incurs any cost, they'll just charge it back to us. Because unlike every other service they provide where we pay more than our share, in any service where we require a little extra, they charge back. I think we do have to involve district in the sense that we have to determine with them what would they accept. If we can print a card that you can hang from your mirror, perhaps, or flash through the passenger side window. By the way, I've gone to the Baxter transfer station on a regular basis for years, and especially more so ever since they put green bin service in, though now I won't care as much anymore because of my food cycler. But having said all that, interestingly enough, a few times they've asked me where I was resident. And what surprised me, are you a resident of Georgian Bay or Muskoka Lakes? They've always asked me the two, which means, does that mean the Muskoka Lakes people are using our transfer station? That's part of the surplus garbage we're getting because they exited Muskoka Lakes and are coming down the 400 from the Mactira area. I'm wondering, or from the Bala area. I'm wondering. But anyway, that's a little aside. But I think we would have to determine. We'd have to determine with the district what they would accept. I mean, are they going to accept the original of our tax bill? Are they going to accept a picture of it? Are they going to accept a photocopy of it? Would they accept a parking pass like card? I think we have to determine what they would accept as proof of the garbage being local garbage, ownership of garbage, as they sometimes refer to it. And I think that has to be step one. You know, when we start talking about the possibility of having cards that are like ID cards because they have our address on them, then they become personalized cards. It becomes a bit more of a headache. But you know, so in the future, are we going to have our ownership paperwork from the township that says that we pay taxes, and then it's our daughter who's driving the car, and our daughter doesn't have the same name we do, and therefore they might not accept that as proof. Like, this is why I think we have to confirm with district where they're going to draw the line. And once we do that, then we can start talking about whether or not that pass that Councilor Graziano waves at us, and yes, I got them dangling from my mirror into my car, whether that would be enough. Or do they need it to have our name on it, or do they need to have our address on it? And therefore it gets more and more complicated, more complex. But to me, that's step one. Talk to the district, say, here's our concern. We want to drop off local garbage at the facilities you provide. And people are asking me, who in their right mind, if it wasn't for this, carries their property tax bill in their car? Who even knows where they're filed at home? I mean, I know where mine is, but I don't. I'm a weirdo. Like, so I think my opinion is step one, let's talk to district staff and find out what they would accept as proof of residency to drop off your garbage. Councillor Bocek.
My question is going to be directed at you, Mayor Coates. You've been at district for a little while now, and I'm just wondering the procedure. Do we need to create a resolution out of here to get the attention of district? And we have a member of our council that sits on the Public Works and Engineering Committee, which I imagine where this would be proposed. So is the way we go about this to have a resolution from our council go to district addressing this issue, and then we have an advocate of Councillor Cooper at the Public Works Committee advocating for this and trying to get some answers? Is that the way this would play out?
I don't think we have to go political yet. And what I
Okay.
mean by that is, I think we would ask our staff to contact their staff. And whether it's Mr. Mariotti or Mr. Socash or somebody else they appoint, talking to Mr. Steele over at district, Commissioner Steele, and saying, okay, here's the situation. We would appreciate you telling us what our residents require in their opinion to prove that the garbage that is being disposed of is residential garbage. Like it's local garbage, if I can call it that way. And depending upon the response, then we might have to decide whether or not we want to escalate this.
Move it to a formal process. I get it. Okay, yeah,
That'd be my suggestion.
yeah. I
CEO
think that would
Mariotti.
work.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Coates. Yeah, I think you make a valid point. If we can park this resolution for now, and then we can get a bit more information from district. It's interesting because when you go on the district's website and it talks about user identification, it does say the District of Muskoka is required by law to confirm that users of the site are residents of Muskoka, and that the waste deposited at each site originated within one of the 6 area municipalities. So it makes sense when that individual was asking you, Mayor Coutier, whether you're from Muskoka Lakes or from Georgian Bay Township. It also goes on to say that site staff do this by asking questions upon arrival at the scale house. So we need clarity on what would be sufficient for them to say, you know what, yes, your class is a resident or not. So let's take the first step and keep it simple, and let's reach out to the district and see what see what they have to say on that.
Yeah, no, but I think that's interesting. That next step, yes, I've definitely had people ask me where I'm resident. But if they go to the next step and want proof, then we need to know from district what proof they would accept. Councillor Graziano.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. And through you, not to open up a whole other can of worms, but if we are paying for waste by the ton and we're collecting from non-Georgian Bay Township residents, why are we paying for Muskoka Lakes? And how do we mitigate that? Because should each municipality not have to pay for what its usage is?
Well,
And
and there's no question that's one of the issues that we have to work on in our solid waste situation, because we produce more garbage per resident by ton than any of the other municipalities. And I strongly suspect that a fair amount of that garbage isn't coming from Muskoka Lakes, but from outside the district or other forms of garbage that should have gone through the transfer station. But we don't know that information because we haven't been collecting it. Councillor Predko.
So corollary to Councillor Graziano's question, we could find out if when you are driving into the waste station and they're weighing your vehicle and they're asking you where your residency is, if they're attributing that volume that's coming off of your vehicle to different municipality or different townships. That would be the only way from our discussion today that they'd be able to not be allocating it all to Georgian Bay Township.
Your Worship, if I may add to that.
Yeah.
I think I think that again, just going back, not to support the permitting or the park permit suggestion, this could also be a very good way to determine whether or not it's coming from our township versus externally, because if there's a way for the attendant to be able to code, a check mark for every time he has someone waving a parking pass at him, or her, or them, that at the end of the day, we can determine what percentage of waste that travels through there is actually ours versus someone else's.
Councillor Hazelton.
In the world of facts matter, the district wants us to believe that we are a huge generator of waste, but they use the statistics from Stats Canada. They don't use the population stats the district has produced showing our 19 or 20,000 residents. And so if we look at those stats, and I've worked with James Steele on these stats, and if you use the population that we have, the true population with all the seasonal residents, we are not a high offender. In fact, we are, I think, number 3 in the generation of waste in the district of Muskoka, as opposed to a massive outlier of being number 1. So once again, the lack of use of the appropriate stats, facts do matter, and I hate it when we have misperceptions circulated because the district uses the wrong data. Thank you.
All right, so at this point, staff, do you require a motion from us, or does our council require a motion from our committee on this, or can we leave it with staff to do a bit of homework and get back to us?
No, I think at this point, let's start with a quick phone call with the district to find out, if transfer stations within our township actually accepts residents from neighboring towns and townships, and secondly, what would be acceptable for them should they require proof of residency, and then we can report back, as we can do a verbal update at next COW meeting even.
Because I'm curious, because every time I drive into the transfer station, I have to pause at a stop sign well before the actual attendant location. And I presume they're recording my license plate number. I don't know, but they are recording something. And I'd be curious to find out what data they're actually recording as I go in and out. Now, having said that, my license plate is not, it does not have a Township of Georgian Bay address, but clearly they haven't checked that, because otherwise they'd be giving me grief. Anyway, enough on that one for now. Enough on council for the last couple of days. So then I have one more motion in front of me, moved by Councillor Hazelton, seconded by, oh, Ms. Wade's getting excited.
Can we just
Stop.
vote for it?
Oh, I thought we just left it as direction. You want to vote?
Well, are we withdrawing it? Like right now, I have it sitting here and I don't have anything to do with
Well, we can put this on. If you like us to vote.
unless it's withdrawn for the moment. I don't.
I'm fine with the referral.
Okay, all those in favor of referral? All right, we've referred. Thank you. Moved by Councillor Hazelton, second by Councillor Bocek. Be resolved, the Committee of the Whole does now adjourn at 4:06 p.m. to be reconvened on September 12th, 2023, or at the call of the chair. All those in favor? And that